Welcome dear students to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. K.S. Nagaraja of Deccan College's Postgraduate Research Institute, Pune. I will be teaching this course on historical linguistics. Today's module is internal reconstruction. Internal reconstruction, as you have already observed from the earlier module on comparative reconstruction, aims at reconstructing the past of the language purely from the internal resources of the language. A famous scholar, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, states, which is very important, language is the armory of the human mind and at once contains the trophies of its past and the weapons of its future conquests. It's a wonderful statement. As you will notice that language is a continuation of the past, though we always say language is like flowing water. In flowing water, though we may not observe, the whole body of water keeps changing at every fraction of seconds. But in case of human language, the whole language never changes totally. It's always in bits and bits. Only when we look at the language in centuries point of view, then we perceive certain changes. And if the centuries increase, the changes become much more significant. So today, we look at how far we can understand the internal reconstruction, the procedure of internal reconstruction, and usefulness of this particular method. Internal reconstruction is like the comparative method or comparative reconstruction, but applied to a single language. It is applied to descriptive information about a single language at a single stage of its development. It is a technique for inferring aspects of the history of a language from what we see in that language alone. Lying behind internal reconstruction is the fact that when a language undergoes changes, traces of the changes are often left behind in the language structure as allomorphic variants or irregularities of some sort. Internal reconstruction is frequently applied in the following situations where it can recover valuable information. 1. To language isolates without any known relatives. 2. To reconstruct proto-languages, to reconstructed proto-languages. And 3. To individual languages to arrive at an earlier stage to which the comparative method can then be applied to compare this with related languages in the family. Phonemic restructurings brought about by sound change tend to make for irregularities of morphophonemic alternations, and conversely, many morphophonemic irregularities found in a language at a given stage reflects an earlier regularity disrupted by phonemic restructuring. Therefore, a careful examination of morphophonemic irregularities in a language and of the distributional aspect of its phonological systems should yield reasonable deduction about its earlier history, chronological sequence of events. Synchronic morphophonemic alternation within a given language, for example, German Tag versus Taga, can be reduced to invariance through internal reconstruction and variation noted across linguistic boundaries. For example, English father versus French père is reduced to invariance through comparative reconstruction. There is a set of principles which we observe so that the right solution is preferred. The principles are: 1. Given two otherwise equally acceptable competing analysis, we prefer the one which postulates more natural or more common processes. B. Given a choice, analysis postulating sound changes are more highly valued than analysis which require analogical or other non-phonetic changes. Similarly, everything else being equal, analysis operating with regular changes are preferred over those which require sporadic or less regular changes. Given two alternative analyses, we will prefer the one which provides greater explanation or motivation for the postulated changes as well as the attested synchronic facts. Such explanation often refer to issues of overall linguistic structures. D. Reconstruction should not violate the maxim attributed to the medieval philosopher Occam that entitles in an argument are not to be multiplied beyond necessity. That is, the simplest possible analysis is to be preferred, everything else being equal. Now, illustration for internal reconstruction. Fundamental assumption of internal reconstruction is that some events in the history of a language leave discernible traces in its design, so that by finding out these traces, one can draw inferences as to the earlier incidents which were responsible for them. Lying behind the internal reconstruction is the assumption that the variants, that is the allomorphs of a morpheme, are not all original, but that at some time in the past each morpheme had but one form or one shape, and that the variants known today have come about as the result of changes that the language has undergone in its past. The fundamental assumption of internal reconstruction is that, as the above quote already has stated, whenever there is some change, it leaves something behind in the language. In fact, when forms come together, they undergo some change, what we normally state as morphophonemic changes. But when the forms occur in isolation, they may not show any changes. The fact that they do not show any change when they occur in isolation, but when they come together, they undergo some change, this becomes an important aspect, and we call it as a morphophonemic change. The types of morphophonemic changes which are found in the language say something about the past. We always assume that at the earliest time the forms were unchanging, and whenever we see there is a change, we assume some change has taken place, and this is the fundamental assumption of internal reconstruction. We internally reconstruct by postulating an earlier single form together with the changes, usually conditioned sound changes, which we believe to have produced the various shapes of the morpheme that we recognize in its alternates. The language reconstructed by internal reconstruction bears the prefix pre as opposed to the proto of comparative method of reconstructions. For example, we would call the results of an internal reconstruction of English pre-English and not proto-English. The steps followed in internal reconstruction, broadly speaking, consist of the following. Step 1. Identify alternations, that is, forms which have more than one phonological shape, that is, different allomorphs in paradigms, derivations, different styles, and so on. Step 2. Postulate a single non-alternating original form. Step 3. Postulate the changes, usually conditioned sound changes, which must have taken place to produce the alternating forms where relevant, determine the relative chronology, the sequence in which these changes might have taken place. As in the comparative method, we use all the information at our disposal concerning directionality of change and how natural or likely or unexpected and unlikely the changes we postulate are in order to evaluate the reconstruction and the changes we propose. Step 4. Check the results to make certain that the changes we postulated do not imply changes for other forums that they do not in fact undergo. That is, we must guard against proposing changes which might seem to work for certain morphemes but which, if allowed to take place, would produce non-existent forms of other morphemes. We must also check to make certain that the postulated reconstructions are typologically plausible and do not imply things that are impossible or highly unlikely in human languages. In actual practice, these steps are typically applied almost simultaneously and with little attempt to distinguish one step from the other. The best way to gain an understanding of internal reconstruction is through examples of its application as will be illustrated below. First example, compare the following words from a language called Tojolabal, a Mayan language, and notice the variants for the morphemes, that means I. In step 1, we identify ha and ka as alternates of the morpheme meaning I. Ha is the variant which occurs before consonants and ka is the form which appears before vowels. In step 2, we attempt to postulate the original form of the morpheme for I in pre-Tojolabal. 3 hypotheses suggest themselves. 1. Reconstruct H or her, which would presuppose a change to ka before vowels to derive the other form of the morpheme, the ka allomorph. The second one, ka as the proto-reconstructed form with the change of ka to ha. And third, possibly some third thing which would change into ha before consonant and into ka before vowels. The third alternative would require 2 independent changes and thus would go against the criterion of economy, whereas hypothesis 1 and 2 would each need only one change. Therefore, we abandon the third under the assumption that it is less likely. There is no particular phonetic motivation for ha to change to ka before vowels as presupposed by hypothesis 1. And if we had more data, we would see that there are plenty of words with initial ha before a vowel, for example, ho, water, hune, etc. However, a change of ka to ha before consonants is not phonetically unusual, a dissimulation encountered in other languages, and if we had more data, we would see there are no consonant clusters in this language with the initial ka. The general directionality of ka to ha before consonants, and that this accounts for the ha variant of this morpheme. So, for example, we would reconstruct ka, man, I by, and then the change of ka to ha before consonants would give modern Haman for IC. However, we reconstruct ka il, and since this ka, that means I, is before a vowel, it does not change, leaving modern Tojolabal with kill. This reconstruction and the derivation of the modern forms are seen in the following table. So this way, through internal reconstruction, we can resolve what must have been the unchanging form before it changed. Here is a case from Nahuatl, a Uto-Aztecan language. A large number of morphemes have two variant shapes, one with an initial E and one without, of the sort illustrated in foot with its two allomorph, ikji, foot, but no the my foot, prefixes and g when it occurs with prefix. In the internal reconstruction, we must reconstruct a single form as original between ikji and kji and attempt to account for the variants which occur by postulating changes which will derive them from the single reconstructed form. In this case, the two most likely choices are: one, to reconstruct the full form ikji together with some rule to delete the initial e in order to provide for the G variant. So in no G, my foot, or to reconstruct G and point some rule to insert the initial E in appropriate context to give G. Since this language, Nahuatl language, there are numerous forms with initial E which do not lose this vowel with prefixes, it turns out to be impossible to write a rule which assumes the E of ikji was originally present but got lost due to the presence of the prefix. This would wrongly predict in step 4 that the non-alternating forms such as hiti should also lose their initial E, but this does not happen. There is no the my stomach, rather the initial E is preserved in that form. So the second hypothesis, that is, if we assume that the initial E was not originally present in the morpheme for foot and reconstruct the words ji, foot, and nok ji, my foot, with E added to the first later by a rule of initial epenthesis, we get the forms. In looking at the phonological pattern of the language, we find that there are no initial consonant clusters, and we therefore assume that a change added E to the beginning of words which formerly began in a consonant cluster. The rule of epenthesis can be given. Thus, we reconstruct the forms and apply the epenthesis rule to produce the modern forms as shown in the table below. Another example has been given from the Finnish internal reconstruction. The students can read it. Then we move to another example nearer home for demonstrating this particular methodology taking from Sanskrit. Here we have two sets. Set 1, we have forms with unchanging formation, that is, there is no morphemic alternation, marut, maruta, but in the instrumental formation we see a change, marud bihi, that is, ta changes to da. So in nominative and instrumental there is no change, marut, maruta, but in instrumental plural, marud bihi, ta changes to da. So there is a regular pattern. But in the second set, we can see that sharat, sharada, sharad bihi, the nominative form sharat, the ta changes to da in the instrumental and form itself, in both in instrumental singular and instrumental plural. So that way there is an alternation. Let us compare the first alternation to begin with. We may apply the method of internal reconstruction to the second set of words which does manifest this alternation and postulate that the words of that set had a single form in both these environments. However, we need to postulate further that they had the and not the as the stem final consonant because they contrast with words of the first set which have a stem final the in both the environments, that is word final and intervocal. That is, the first the alternation resulted according to this reconstruction through the devising of the stem final consonant the of the words of the second set when no vowel followed. Notice, however, that the exact phonetic makeup of this reconstructed sound cannot be derived from this procedure. We can only claim that it needs to be distinct from the because of words occurring in set 1. In the case of second alternation also, we can apply the method of internal reconstruction and claim that the alternation did not occur at an earlier stage and that it has resulted from sound change. However, we need to postulate two different sound changes in order to account for its occurrence in the two sets of words as shown below. In the case of the first set of words, we can claim that pre-Sanskrit had a final the in these words in both these environments. The change of the to the in the second environment, that is voicing before a voice consonant, was responsible for the occurrence of this alternation in those words. In the case of the second set of words, on the other hand, we need to postulate that the words uniformly had a stem final the in pre-Sanskrit. The the alternation occurring in them resulted from the devising of that sound when either a voice consonant or a vowel, which is also voice, did not occur after it. Thus, the reconstruction of the first set of words for pre-Sanskrit would be with a stem final the throughout, and for the second set of words with a stem final the throughout, as can be seen below. The reconstructed pre-Sanskrit forms are given. Now, limitations of internal reconstruction. The strongest limitation is that while internal reconstruction is often able to recover conditioned changes, internal reconstruction cannot recover unconditioned changes. For example, in the unconditioned change merger of O and O to A in Sanskrit, these original vowels ended up as O. If we attempt to reconstruct internally the pre-Sanskrit forms of Danta, tooth, or Dva, two, we find that Danta originally had a Proto-Indo-European dent, compare Latin dent, but that Dva had O, Proto-Indo-European dvo, compare Latin duo. The method may be reliable if later changes have not eliminated or rendered unrecognizable the context or context which condition the change that we would like to recover as reflected in alternations in the language. However, internal reconstruction can be difficult or impossible if later changes have severely altered the context which condition the variants that we attempt to reconstruct. For example, some splits are impossible to recover due to subsequent changes, as illustrated by the case of voice fricatives in English. We observe in English such forms as breath, breath, bath, bath, wrath, wrath, which suggests an alternation between tha and the, voiceless and voice dental fricatives. Because we can identify alternations, we would like to be able to reconstruct a single original form, but since in these forms both alternates can occur in exactly the same phonetic environment, we have no basis for reconstruction. Internal reconstruction is a useful method of reconstruction. Its fundamental assumption is that some event in the history of a language leave discernible traces in its design, so that by finding these traces one can draw inferences as to the earlier incidents which were responsible for them. Though historical validity cannot be ascertained from the data through internal reconstruction, and the application of this method of reconstruction is restricted to those items only in which the split had created a morphophonemic alternation. And in the references section, many works have been referred to which are highly useful. More information, more instances can be obtained from them. Thank you.